Hello, everybody. Jax West from Stephen Avery Project, Justice with Jax, and what else? MAM Gossip, where we are right now. So today we are going to start reading Wrecking Crew. One thing I want to say about Wrecking Crew before we get started. Why isn't this letting me see comments or giving me the ability to comment? Facebook is so I have no idea. I don't have access for comments. I don't know. Oh, this thing's so dumb. Sorry, getting distracted. Why, oh, why can't I see it? I'm clicking that, doesn't change it. I have no idea. So if you're commenting, I'm not seeing it because it's all grayed out. But it shows that there are people here. But I can't really comment anyway when I'm reading. Let me pull up over on my other screen here and see if I can see any comments on it there. It's not even showing me the lives going on over here. Technical difficulties. Because hopefully this is going to the right place. Alright, there it is. Oh, okay. So there are comments over on this page, but there's not where I'm currently live. Oh, the joys of Facebook that I can't see comments even though I'm doing the live. But over here, I can see that Veronica has commented, and so has Bryce. So, all right, so the first thing I want to say about Wrecking Crew before we get started in reading it is a misconception that a lot of people have about this book. I see it posted all the time that people will say Kathleen Zellner's book. It is not Kathleen Zellner's book. It is John Ferrick's book. John Ferrick is who wrote this. He was a reporter. Actually, okay, let me read what it says on the back. In 2016-2017, while working for the U.S. Today Network's Wisconsin investigative team, author John Ferrick wrote dozens of articles examining the murder case. Ooh, a typo. It says against Stephen Avery, who had already beat one wrongful conviction, only to be charged with the murder of Teresa Halbach in 2005. The case became the wildly successful Netflix Making a Murderer documentary. And then on the bottom here, on the back, it's got his picture. And it says, a native of Joliet, Illinois, which is like half hour, 45 minutes from my house. John Ferrick returned to his roots in 2017 to become the editor-reporter for the Joliet Patch. He previously spent 5 years with the Wisconsin investigative team for the USA Today and 9 years in Nebraska at the Omaha World Herald newspaper. He is an authority on wrongful arrest and conviction cases. His 2016 book for Wild Blue Press, Failure of Justice, chronicled the nation's largest wrongful conviction case. His first book, Bloody Lies, told the story about a CSI director who went to prison for planting blood in high-profile Nebraska murder cases. So this book, thank you, Audrey. And hello, Natalie. So the book is written by John Farrick, but John Farrick does have a decent relationship with Kathleen Zellner. So Kathleen has talked with him and given him information that is used in the book. But this book is not written by Kathleen. It is written by John Farrick. I have done a Facebook Live with John Farrick before. We did it on the Stephen Avery Project page. So you can find it in the videos over there. We did it a virtual that I used software. So, we were both able to be on the screen. So you can find John Farrick there. And then I also went to one of his book, what do you call it? I mean, it wasn't a book signing, but he talked about the book and the writing of the book. I don't know if I think I might have filmed all of that. And then I posted pictures of that. And also, when I was there, I got him to sign a bunch of books. So this one is signed to me that says, "To Jax, thank you for all your support of Stephen Avery and Justice, John Farrick." Then I've got all these that are signed by John Farrick. One of them I had him write to supporters directly. Not that one. Not that one. Of course, it's going to be the last one I look at. This one. And it says, "To supporters of Stephen Avery, thank you for fighting on, John Farrick." So we're going to do something with this book to raffle it off to you all. But, so this autographed book. So don't know how or when or why. Maybe I will just tie it into our rally. But also, we've got these 3 other ones that are signed too. So maybe we'll do 2 people who come to the rally, get the opportunity to get a book, and 2 people who are not able to get to the rally. Real quick, I always say real quick, even though I talk forever. Since I just brought up the rally, I don't want there to be any confusion on the whole rally talk that's been going on recently. There are now, that I know of, 2 rallies in July. Ours, which was in July last year, and this will be our second one, and now Carla's. That Carla's for the last 3 years had been in June. That was a reason why we chose July last year, to keep it away from their rally, to not interfere. And they've decided now, since we did one last year and doing one this year, they'll make theirs to be a couple weeks before ours to try and sabotage our rally. Whatever. That's just typical Carla. But so Brad Dassey had tweeted a screenshot of a message he had with somebody where this person allegedly speaks to Stephen quite often. And the person wanted Brad to put the word out that Stephen doesn't want anybody buying those lime green awful shirts, because they mislead people in telling them that these shirts the money goes towards Dolores, and it does not. And so Stephen did not want anybody to purchase those shirts. That is what Brad's post said. But Sandy has now put out a post. Now, I don't know if somebody else had said something about July rallies, or if she's just lying as typical Sandy does, and said that she's trying to correct misinformation, that Stephen has not said he doesn't approve of the rally, which would not be my rally, would mean Carla's rally that they're referring to. because Sandy and, Carla and all them have nothing to do with me, nor do I have anything. It's a mutual dislike. So the July rally that Sandy would be talking about that Stephen approves of will be Carla's rally, not mine. The rally that we are doing is not Avery approved. I do not know if Stephen will put something out through Sandy, or Sandy will just lie and put something out saying it's from Stephen, that Stephen does not want people to participate in the rally. I do. I don't know. I don't care. It's constant drama and not what I'm here for. Whether Stephen likes it or not, we support his innocence, and we will be at Waupun the last Saturday of July. So I don't care if Sandy makes some post saying such and such. I know for a fact that Sandy is a liar when it comes to passing along information from Stephen. Because back when I used to talk to Stephen, and I posted about this today, but Stephen and I had an on-phone relationship at first. I was not on his visitors list. He would only call me whenever he wants to call me. He had always been told, if he wants to put me on his visitors list, I'll come. If he doesn't want to add me to the list, don't. I don't care. Put on the list who you want. And so then eventually Stephen stopped calling me. And I found out that was due to lies he is being told by Carla, blah, blah, blah. Then 6 months later, Stephen calls me out of the blue. And I find out that the reason he stopped talking to me is because Sandy, Tracy Strunzi, and Angela something or another, Angie something or another, had all been telling Stephen lies about me. Stephen told me nobody talks more smurf about me than Tracy Strunzi, the one who pretends to be a lawyer but isn't a lawyer. And so the three of them were all pushing him to stop talking to me. And so he did. And then the 6 months later, he reaches out to me again and he tells me it has been nothing but drama with Tracy and Angie, and that Sandy is all upset at her BFFs because she felt that those girls now just use Sandy to get close to Stephen. And now that Sandy had Stephen add them to his visitors list, they were starting to visit Stephen without Sandy. So it was no more big parties at Sandy's house and, oh, look at us, we're all such good friends, even though Sandy's old enough to be their grandmother. And so that Sandy demanded Stephen remove them off of his list. But Sandy didn't want them to know that because she still wants to be fake friends with them and pretend, everything's all good, and then put the blame on me. That I was the one that had Stephen block them, which I had nothing to do with any of it, nor do I care. But that's just another lie from Sandy. So then Stephen added me to his visitors list. I started visiting with him. And then out of the blue, Stephen stops talking to me again. And then Sandy makes a post on Facebook saying Stephen asked her to make this post, and Carla made some post about it too, saying that Stephen has removed me immediately because Sandy has told him that I was talking smurf about his mother, which never happened. Sup, cat? So, and I also know back when Stephen was dating that Lynn freak, and what's-her-face, Sandy, got all upset and jealous over that. She went to a British tabloid and sold a story talking smurf about Stephen, and then she started going to the prison visiting some other dude who was a pedophile, and then she had changed her Facebook status to say she was engaged to the pedophile to try and upset Stephen, who and she likes to try and pretend to people like her and Steven are still a thing or gonna be a romantic thing, and that's never gonna happen. She might be the person that Steven talks to, but there's never going to be a romantic relationship between the two of them. Steven will never forget Sandy dumping him on Dr. Phil, just like Lynn did. So these are the people who want to talk smurf about me and try and tell people not to have anything to do with any of the things that I do. But I'm not the one doing this manipulation and trying to put stuff in my pocket. Like Sandy's had a GoFundMe because her basement flooded, and so somebody helped me pay for the flooding in my basement. Yeah, Natalie. Sandy was, I don't think she was in Gossip. I think she was still on Stephen Avery Project. Sandy and I, once upon a time, were friends. And I used to defend Sandy to the Averys because the Averys hate her with a passion. And so I used to defend Sandy, and this is before Sandy had her own group. You know, everybody's got to have their own group, and everybody wants to say their group is the official Steven such and such. So Sandy didn't have her own group at that time, and so I welcomed her into all of my groups. And then I had even made a thread that thread was just going to be Q&A with Sandy. You know, and that people could ask her any questions and she'll answer, and it was really nice. And when Carla found out about it, hi Carla, because you know she's watching, Carla threw a fit, and then in her group she made a thread for Sandy to answer questions and told Sandy she couldn't be in my group. And Sandy is so afraid of upsetting the family and not having any connection to Steven, because it's the only thing she has going in her life is to be I'm the Sandy Greenman from Making a Murderer, who did not get Kathleen Zellner, by the way. Steven told her to reach out to Kathleen Zellner, but she'll take credit for it. Like, I saved Steven. No, you did not. Steven did that all himself, and he told you to reach out to her, and you did. So, but I just wanted to put that to rest, that whatever Sandy is posting and whatever Brad had posted about the shirts, none of that has anything to do with me or the rally that we are doing. There. So, I know not everybody who comes in here and gossip watches the live video. So, we're probably going to have to keep explaining that over and over to people. But I just wanted to make sure I can see where there'd be the confusion of talking about July rally and shirts, and automatically people are going to point that finger at me. And it's not me. What is this? Hold on. Because this is saying, I don't know. All right. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to start reading Wrecking Crew. When I am reading it, I'm not going to really be looking up at your comments. You know, I'll look up on occasion, you know, because I'm looking at a book, right? So I'm not looking at both places. So I won't necessarily be able to answer any questions, and I may miss it. Don't think I'm ignoring you. I'm looking at a book. And maybe those of you who have been around the case for a while can answer anybody's questions. I will, of course, I always have to put my own spin on things. So there'll be times when I can't control myself, and I will have to add my own commentary onto what I just read. So you just have to bear with me if I go off into a tirade. I read this book when it first came out, so it's been years since I read it. When did this book come out? When did this book come out? 2018. So, oh, I'm not going to read this one. I'm not going to read the one that says to supporters. I'll read this one. What does this autograph say? Thank you for all your support of Stephen Avery and Wrecking Crew. His handwriting is like a doctor. It's hard to read. And even Avery, it looks like on this one anyway that it's Avey. I don't know. So, and I'm probably going to read for maybe 2 hours. I don't know. Whenever I come to a good stopping point, we're not reading the whole book in one go. And so we do have an event made to do it again on Wednesday. I do the lives at the same, every time I do a live, it's at the same time. So what time this one started, which is 1 p.m. Chicago time, is the time it will start on Wednesday. So your time. So, so take a note, write it down, stick it somewhere to remind yourself of lives here start at such and such time. Okay, here we go. Introduction. When a Midwest farm girl named Teresa Halbach went off to college in Green Bay, Wisconsin, she found her calling holding the camera. A short distance from Lambeau Field, she started making money as a part-time photographer at Green Bay's West Side Shopping Mall. To her family, Teresa Halbach was the happy-go-lucky, aspiring photographer. She took photographs at weddings and also snapped children's photos. But after graduating college, Teresa started dabbling in more risky, provocative photography. And I couldn't believe it the first time I read this, that it's like, dang, he's going there talking about the victim in a not so great light from the get-go. She had a wild and crazy side. Future employment prospects with X-rated magazines such as Hustler and Penthouse were not out of the question. Quote, I gave my permission to Miss Halbach on a number of occasions to use my photography studio for nude portraits of her clients. In fact, a portion of my own business was taking nude photographs of my clients, unquote, reflected Tom Pierce, or is it Pierce, owner of Pierce Photography. During Teresa's last year of life, she was sucked into some of the darkest corners of the web. Her business, Photography by Teresa, was out hustling for new sexually explicit photography clients, people who needed someone to capture them in more daring and provocative poses. Quote, Photography by Teresa is adult entertainment products and services, photography, portrait photography, professional photography, special occasion photography, visual arts company. Get in touch with Photography by Teresa with contact details, ... unquote. Many years after his understudy's untimely and gruesome death, Pierce was asked to review Teresa's business profile advertising her adult-oriented photography services. Quote, based upon my personal knowledge of Ms. Halbach's business, that is an accurate depiction of the services offered by Ms. Halbach in the regular course of her business, unquote, Pierce said. Besides her nude photography business, Halbach also hit the back roads for Auto Trader magazine. She snapped photos of cars, trucks, and vans that people desired to sell. This work was concentrated around the Green Bay area, including Sheboygan and Manitowoc counties to the south. With Auto Trader, a number of the men she encountered found she had sex appeal. They were attracted to her small frame and wanted to experience her wild side. Quote, in March 2005, Ms. Halbach told me that a male Auto Trader client made sexual advances toward her and invited her into his residence, unquote, Pierce recalls. Teresa told me that this advance made her feel uncomfortable. After this incident, Ms. Halbach did not mention any problems with Auto Trader clients. Specifically, Ms. Halbach never expressed concern about going to the Avery property, unquote. Yet, before she disappeared on Halloween 2005, Halbach had reason to be apprehensive. Her life was in grave danger. Quote, I was aware that Ms. Halbach was getting phone calls from someone who was harassing her, unquote, Pierce said. At the same time, a messy divorce case at the Brown County Courthouse in downtown Green Bay was also preoccupying her time. A husband and wife who lived near Green Bay had used her nude photography services at her Green Bay studio on Western Avenue. But when the couple's rocky marriage crumbled, Teresa began a romantic relationship with the man, who was almost a decade older than her. He ran a wedding disc jockey service and worked for a Green Bay television station. Quote, Teresa had taken nude photographs of Bradley and his wife. ... After this, Bradley and his wife had broken up, and Teresa started dating Bradley. Teresa and Bradley would only have sex, and Teresa did not have any feelings for him, and it was only physical. Bradley and his wife were having problems at one time, and he would confide in Teresa about his problems. Unquote. That's from Wiegert's interview of Jolene Bain. On the day before she died, Teresa exchanged emails with a supportive friend who encouraged her efforts to grow her adult-oriented photography business. Quote, Hey Teresa, it was great to hear about your busy life. Sounds like so many things have changed for you in the last year. I'm so happy to hear that business is good. It sounds like you have many hobbies and things going on. It's great. I'm envious and wish I could make the time for that. I wouldn't have imagined Adrian asking you to take nude photos of her. That's cool, though, that she is comfortable enough. Maybe we could pass your name around for porn shots, unquote. And that is correspondence regarding nude photography. 5 weeks earlier, a guy named Ken, not Kratz, sent an email to Teresa's photography business thanking her for the letter and package she sent him. Quote, and the package. Well, I think you take better care of me than my mother does. Well, I think that's a good thing. ... I wouldn't want my mom sending me a porn. I really appreciate everything, and damn it, I really want to talk with you. ... I really miss you, and really thank you for sending me messages to my beeper. ... I should be back online Monday. Hopefully we can talk. I miss you, and thank you very much for the goodies. I'll let you know the results. Bye, Ken. Unquote. By November 4, 2005, 4 days after Teresa visited Avery Road in Manitowoc County for a scheduled photo assignment, the Calumet County Sheriff's Office opened a trunk inside her bedroom. She had recently moved into the two-story house on her family's dairy farm near the town of Hilbert, population 1,100. Quote, I did locate in a trunk directly next to Teresa's bed several nude photos of a male and a female. Included with these photos were several negatives. There was a portrait order from Pierce Photography which had the name Bradley and Casey Check. Unquote. That's also from a Wiegert report. At that point, nobody knew whether these nude photos of the divorced couple were at the heart of her disappearance. The woman had taken out an emergency protection order to keep her ex-husband away from her and out of her life. The photographs recovered from Teresa's bedroom were a focal part of the bitter divorce case. Given Teresa's disappearance, the police would attempt to learn more about Teresa's sexual intimacy with the Green Bay disc jockey. Quote, by the end, Teresa was pretty much leading a double life, unquote, Check said. And that was Bradley Check's interview with Kathleen's private investigator. All right, Chapter 1, Turnabout. Green Bay's television stations led off their newscasts with a chilling mystery on Thursday night, November 3, 2005. A fiercely independent, happy-go-lucky young woman. Wait a minute. How independent are you when you live in your parents' house? I mean, it's a separate house, but it's on your parents' property, and it's the house they own. So I wouldn't count that as very independent. But anyway, okay, go on. No one had seen or heard from her during the past 4 days. Television anchors painted a grim outlook as photos of Teresa Halbach flashed across the screen. Viewers were left uneasy and fearful of a worst-case scenario. Surely someone watching the distressing news would remember encountering Teresa over the past few days. At least that's what the small-town Calumet County Sheriff's Office in Chilton, Wisconsin hoped. But it was not Teresa's face displayed on the television screen that drew a red flag with one of the Manitowoc County residents. It was the image of her missing sports utility vehicle, a Toyota RAV4. During that time frame, Kevin Romlo lived around Mishikat, a small but proud Wisconsin town of 1,400 people of German, Swiss, and Bohemian heritage. Back in the day, Mishikat had 6 hotels, 3 general stores, a movie theater, a grist mill, and a brewery. By 2005, the community's 3 original churches still stood the test of time, but Mishikat looked different. The town's gas station, owned by Cenex, was one of the local hangouts. People came there for fuel, a cup of coffee, and to buy their cigarettes. The popular business was at the corner of State Highway 147 and State Street. Kevin Romlo vividly remembers when he pulled into the Cenex. It was Friday, November 4. Inside the convenience store, the missing persons poster caught his eye. Teresa Marie Halbach, the flyer noted, was 5'6", 135 pounds, brown eyes, and light brown hair. Quote, I remember that the poster had a picture of Teresa Halbach and written descriptions of Teresa Halbach and the car she was driving, unquote, Romlo said. As it turned out, Cenex was one of many small-town businesses, bars, and cafes where Teresa's concerned friends and family slapped up posters. They were desperate for answers, hoping somebody, anybody, remembered a sighting. And if the locals didn't see Teresa, perhaps they saw her Toyota RAV4. It had a large Lemieux Toyota sign on the back of her vehicle where the spare tire hung. When Romlo saw the poster, he remembered something. Quote, on November 3 and 4, 2005, I was in Mishikat. I saw Teresa Halbach's vehicle by the East Twin River Dam in Mishikat at the turnabout by the bridge as I drove west on Highway 147. I recognized that the written description of the vehicle on the poster matched the car I saw at the turnaround by the dam, unquote. That Friday afternoon, Romlo happened to spot a man in a brown uniform. The man was sporting a badge. Quote, while I was in the Cenex station, a Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department officer came into the station. I immediately told the officer that I had seen a car that matched the description of the car on Teresa Halbach's missing poster at the turnaround by the dam, unquote. After speaking with the uniformed deputy, Romlo went on with his life. He had no idea whatever became of the matter. He later moved to another Midwest state. He even missed the initial, and then on this page is the picture of the flyer. Of the initial Making a Murderer craze on Netflix that captured worldwide attention. In December 2015, a true crime documentary about the Steven Avery murder case was released on Netflix, but Romlo didn't get swept up in the media frenzy. An entire year passed before he finally turned on Netflix to watch it. And as he watched Making a Murderer, the Minnesota man had a flashback. He remembered his encounter at the gas station in Mishikat from more than a decade ago. And besides being familiar with Manitowoc County, Romlo knew some of the key people who worked hand in hand with Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz to cement the guilt of Steven Avery. Avery, as the world now knows, was a previously wrongfully convicted man who lost 18 years due to a barbaric daytime rape. Nope, sorry, John Farrick, there was no rape. Along the Lake Michigan shoreline during the summer of 1985. This was the crime that allowed dangerous sexual predator Gregory Allen to get away by the forces who ran the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office, notably Sheriff Tom Kosarik, who was about 40 years old at the time. Fast forward to 2007. Avery stood trial in Chilton for Teresa's murder, even though the prosecution's evidence was like a piece of Swiss cheese. And yet, despite his side's many holes, Ken Kratz overcame his murder case's numerous physical evidence shortcomings thanks to the unbelievable eyewitness testimonies from a number of unscrupulous people who very much had a stake, a big stake, in the desired outcome of an Avery guilty verdict. December 12, 2016. 2 weeks before Christmas, Ramlow sent a text message to someone he recognized from Making a Murderer. By then, Scott Taddock was happily married to Stephen Avery's younger sister, Barb. At the time of Teresa's disappearance, Barb Yonda lived in one of the trailers at the Avery Salvage Yard compound, a 40-acre tract out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by large gravel pits. At the time of Teresa's disappearance, Barb and Scott Taddock were steady lovers, secret lovers, and she was in the process of getting another divorce, this time from Tom Yonda, Scott Taddock's cousin. After watching Making a Murderer, Ramlow informed his old acquaintance how, quote, I need to get in touch with one of their lawyers, unquote. Ramlow explained in his text message to Scott Taddock how he recognized Teresa's vehicle as the one he saw by the old dam, either November 3 or 4. He also remembered having a conversation with a man whose face regularly appeared during the Making a Murderer episodes. Scott Taddock did not respond. Ramlow reached out again 90 minutes later. The second time, he texted his phone number to Taddock. He wanted to discuss the matter over the phone. Quote, okay, I will. I am really sick now, can hardly talk, so I will call tomorrow, unquote, Taddock texted back. But Taddock never did call back. Quote, I did not hear from Mr. Taddock the next day or any other day responsive to my request for attorney contact information for Stephen Avery or Brendan Dassey, unquote, Ramlow said. Quote, I received another message from Mr. Taddock on December 19, 2016 at 6:10 p.m., which was not responsive to my request, unquote. There is no doubt in his mind that Ramlow saw Teresa's RAV4 along the rural stretch of two-lane State Highway 147 near the East Twin River Dam. The turnaround on the highway was barely a mile from Avery Salvage. A licensed private investigator in Illinois and Wisconsin, James R. Kirby, was hired by Kathleen T. Zellner and Associates to investigate Teresa's murder case. Quote, I requested abandoned and towed vehicle reports for the time period of October 31, 2005 through November 5, 2005 from the following agencies: Mishicot Police Department, Two Rivers Police Department, and the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, unquote, Kirby said. This, of course, was the period when Teresa was last seen in Manitowoc County near Mishicot. On a Saturday morning, 6 days later, under highly suspicious circumstances, her Toyota RAV4 turned up, double parked, on the far back ridge of Avery Salvage, near a row of junked vehicles. The spot of the find bordered the massive sand and gravel pit operated by Joshua Redant. The question lingered. Who moved Teresa's SUV to the far outer edge of Avery Salvage? Bobby. Near a row of junked vehicles. The spot of the find... Oh, I read that already. Was it the killer working alone? No. Was it the killer working in tandem with an accomplice? Or was it somebody affiliated with the volunteer search party? Or was it one of the Manitowoc County Sheriff deputies? Incidentally, at the time of her disappearance, Teresa's RAV4 had no front end damage. This small but critical detail is substantiated by the fact that the missing person flyers made no mention of any broken auto parts or wreckage. But when her sports utility vehicle surfaced on the Avery property, it showed heavy front end damage. Weirdly, the broken blinker light from the driver's side was neatly tucked away into the rear cargo area of the murdered woman's auto. Why would the killer do something so strange? Of course, the logical scenario was that the killer had nothing to do with moving the vehicle to Avery's property, and that the mishap occurred late at night during the clandestine efforts to sneak the vehicle onto the Avery property without Avery or his family members catching on. In any event, Private Eye Kirby's inquiry into the RAV4 spotted by Romlo on Friday afternoon, November 4, 2005, revealed that the, quote, Mishicot Police Department had no responsive records. Based upon the response of Two Rivers Police Department and Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office, pursuant to my request, none of these agencies logged an abandoned vehicle on Highway 147 near the East Twin River Bridge, unquote. Obviously, one of the most plausible scenarios for why the police did not log the abandoned vehicle spotted near the old dam on Highway 147 in rural Manitowoc County, which was Manitowoc County Sheriff's territory, was because the auto belonged to Teresa and it got moved as a direct result of Manitowoc County's intercession. Chapter 2. Bobby, the killer, departs. The four Dassey brothers were Brian, 20, Bobby, 19, Blaine, almost 17, and Brendan, 16. As mentioned earlier, the Dasseys occupied one of the mobile home trailers along Avery Road at their family's Avery Salvage Yard compound. Brian, the oldest brother, worked in nearby Two Rivers at Woodland Face Veneer, a factory overlooking the scenic Lake Michigan. Regarding the day in question, October 31, 2005, Brian Dassey told Wisconsin's Division of Criminal Investigation Special Agents Kim Skorlinski and Deborah K. Strauss that he left for his job at 6 a.m. and visited his girlfriend afterwards. He was not on Avery Road, quote, except for waking up and going to work. Brian said he got home sometime after supper but did not recall when that was, unquote. And that's from his deposition. Or his interview, sorry. Eventually, the question steered toward the missing photographer. She had been a regular visitor to the Avery Salvage Yard during the past year without any problems or hassles, unlike at some of her other unnerving auto trader assignments where men tried to proposition her or invite her inside their homes for an alcoholic beverage. Whenever Teresa visited Avery Road, she was given courtesy and respect. Quote, Brian said he heard from his mom and Stephen that Halbach was only at their residence about 5 minutes. He heard she just took the photo of the van and left. Brian said the investigators should also talk to his brother Bobby because he saw her leave the property, unquote. At Avery's 5-week murder trial in 2007, prosecutor Ken Kratz chose to keep Brian Dassey off his side's witness stand. Therefore, the jury deciding Stephen Avery's fate never heard the following account. Quote, in October and November 2005, I lived with my girlfriend, but I kept my clothing at my mother's trailer, which was on the Avery's auto salvage property. On or about Thursday, November 4, 2005, I returned to my mother's trailer to retrieve some clothes, and I had a conversation with my brother, Bobby, about Teresa Halbach. I distinctly remember Bobby telling me, quote, Stephen could not have killed her because I saw her leave the property on October 31, 2005, unquote. Brian Dassey's October 2017 sworn affidavit recalled how he was pulled over by police on November 6, 2005. He was behind the wheel of his uncle Stephen Avery's Pontiac. Quote, my brother Brendan was in the car with me, and he was interviewed by other officers at the same time as me. I told the investigators that they should talk to my brother Bobby because he saw Teresa Halbach leave the Avery property on October 31, 2005. I was not called as a witness to testify at my Uncle Stephen's criminal trial, unquote. Most of the world who watched Making a Murderer fell in love with Stephen Avery's private counsel, Dean Strang and Jerome Buting. The two criminal defense lawyers worked closely together, putting forth a heroic defense for their client at his murder trial. But even they now admit that, in retrospect, they overlooked some things along the way. They had hired Conrad Pete Bates, a retired police detective, as their investigator in preparation for trial. Bates had moved back to his native Manitowoc County after his retirement in downstate Illinois. He had spent many years at the Madison County Sheriff's Office near St. Louis. Quote, I have reviewed the police report of the November 6, 2005 interview of Brian Dassey, where he said that Bobby Dassey saw Teresa Halbach leave the Avery property on October 31, 2005. I was unaware of this report. I never tried to interview Brian Dassey about Bobby Dassey's alleged statement. I was never instructed by trial defense counsel Buting and Strang to interview Brian Dassey, unquote, Bates said. Quote, Bobby Dassey was the key prosecution witness at Stephen Avery's trial, who testified that he saw Ms. Halbach walk toward Mr. Avery's trailer after taking photographs of his mother Barb Yanda's van. Bobby also testified that when he left the Avery salvage yard, Ms. Halbach's vehicle was still on the property. Unquote. In hindsight, Bates realized that the statement had major significance. Unquote. In the defense, if the trial defense counsel could have impeached Bobby Dassey with Brian Dassey's testimony that Bobby admitted he saw Ms. Halbach leave Avery salvage yard, it would have undermined the state's entire case against Mr. Avery, and there would have been a reasonable probability of him being found not guilty. Unquote. 1 week after the horrifying news of Teresa's disappearance, 2 key developments occurred. First, Stephen Avery, who was perhaps the second to last person to see Teresa alive, was taken into custody and jailed for her murder. This standalone event set the wheels in motion for the collapse of Avery's $36 million federal civil rights lawsuit against Manitowoc County, whose insurance company had already chosen to deny coverage of the civil rights lawsuit based on Avery's allegation misconduct on the part of former Manitowoc County Sheriff Tom Kosarik and prosecutor Dennis Vogel was intentional, not just negligence on the part of these former county officials. The insurance company's denial of coverage served to greatly increase the pressure on the individual defendants who were named in Avery's lawsuit, because they could have been bankrupt by an adverse jury award in the high-profile wrongful conviction case. Second, 19-year-old Bobby Dassey, who may be the last person Teresa ever saw. Shut up, Alexa. That scared me. Was confronted by Wisconsin police investigators on November 9, 2005, a Wednesday afternoon. Quote, you're not under arrest, you understand that, unquote. I gotta yawn, said John Dietering, a middle-aged, bold detective for the rural Calumet County Sheriff's Office. Quote, this isn't an arrest, but, we need to hold on to you so we get our blood, our swabs, and our prints and such, okay? Unquote. Dietering had a search warrant for Bobby Dassey, who was 5'10", 180 pounds, brown hair, and blue eyes. At the time, Dietering and the other police officers trying to find Teresa did not know that Bobby Dassey was an awkward social misfit, a sexual deviant who had recurring sexual-fueled fantasies involving bestiality, mutilating naked women, torture, and drownings. Bobby's obsessions were being shielded from the police and the special prosecutor directing the murder probe. Obviously, Bobby was not about to volunteer such deviant information when he sat down for a formal face-to-face police interview regarding the events in question. At any rate, the search warrant gave these Wisconsin investigators permission to get Bobby's DNA, including a saliva and blood sample. Additionally, quote, Bobby A. Dassey is ordered to provide a forefinger and thumbprint evidence. The physical person of Bobby A. Dassey shall be searched and documented, including but not limited to scratches, bruises, and bite marks, unquote. Since it says Bobby A. Dassey, does that mean his birth name is Bobby and not Robert? Manitowoc County Judge Jerome Fox signed the order on November 7, 2005 at 7:08 p.m. On a side note, Fox's legacy in the case would be his decision to sentence Brendan Dassey to remain incarcerated at a Wisconsin penal institution until at least 2048, when he will first become eligible for parole. It's unclear why Detering and other investigators chose to drag their heels and not move with expediency to obtain Bobby's DNA samples on the night of November 7, 2005. After all, this was an open and unsolved murder. Nobody was arrested yet. Of course, there may have been some discussions among the Manitowoc County Sheriff's officials who were quietly calling the shots and directing the Avery investigation because they wanted Avery's $36 million lawsuit to implode. Their professional livelihoods were at stake if Avery's civil suit was a success. Sure enough, the next day, November 8, turned out to the most fortuitous day of the continuing murder saga at Avery Salvage. That Tuesday morning, the front and back license plates to Teresa's RAV4 suddenly appeared inside an abandoned station wagon that had its windows shattered. It was an easy place to plant evidence, especially when you consider that the station wagon was one of the several thousand wrecked cars that were searched by the police 2 days earlier on Sunday, November 6. But that initial police and volunteer firefighter canvass of the entire Avery salvage yard harvested no damning murder clues. No legitimate reason was given to explain why the authorities, at the recommendation of dubious Calumet County Detective Mark Wiegert, were summoned again 2 days later to search the same junked cars shortly after the crack of dawn. November 8, 2005 was also the same morning when the Manitowoc County Sheriff Office's crackerjack evidence collection team of Detective James Lenk and Andy Colborn were back at Avery's. As far as they wanted the public to know, they had reached the conclusion that they just had not done a thorough enough of a job during their previous several days of constantly searching through Stephen Avery's tiny bedroom and his book cabinet dresser for physical evidence. This time, this Tuesday morning, they were certain that disturbing clues fingering Avery for Teresa's murder were still being concealed inside their murder suspect's bedroom. Colborn maintained that he shook the wooden magazine cabinet near Avery's bed that contained all of Avery's Playboys. Then, out of nowhere, a single key, a spare key, shot out of the cabinet at an angle. Don't you just love the snark that he writes with? The spare key landed softly on the blue carpet where the sharp-eyed Detective Link walked back into Avery's bedroom and exclaimed, quote, "There's a key on the floor," unquote. That afternoon, another Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, Sergeant Jason Jost, happened to be aimlessly wandering around the Avery property. Jost, it's got to be Jost, right? Jost wrote in his reports that he had a suspicion from walking outside that perhaps some of Teresa's bones were here on the property waiting to be found. And Jost was right. He supposedly found a couple of large, charred bones out in the grass in Stephen Avery's backyard. Because the charred bones were not symmetrical, this raised questions about their baffling discovery. On top of that, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office chose not to capture any photographs or make any videotapes showing the condition and location of these human bones being recovered near Avery's burn pit. Instead, the authorities took photos of other things such as dried leaves and other debris used to ignite a bonfire. In sum, the recovery of the spare key, the bent up license plates, and the backyard bones helped the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office finally get even with their bitter enemy. Equally important, Stephen Avery's arrest signified to Bobby Dassey, the killer, that he was essentially off the hook as the prime suspect. He could breathe a sigh of relief, a deep sigh. At the time of Teresa's disappearance, Bobby was proficient at dismembering the carcasses of wild animals, unlike Stephen Avery, who didn't have much of an interest in hunting. And unlike most of Manitowoc County, Bobby was developing an appetite for devouring the flesh of roadkill. Bobby claimed he came across a deer carcass on one of the roads near his house in the aftermath of Teresa's disappearance. Bobby claimed he grabbed the deer off the road and hauled it back to his family's garage to slice it up. How many 19-year-olds do you know who cruise around their gravel roads and side roads looking for dead deer to scoop up and take home for grub? And why all of a sudden during the first week of November, just days after Teresa vanished? During a subsequent interview with police, Brian Dassey, the oldest of the Dassey boys, was asked by the detectives, quote, if he could remember anything strange that had stuck out in his mind during that time after Halloween, unquote. He said the incident, quote, when Bobby had hung the deer in his mom's garage, unquote. But back in November 2005, nobody was giving serious thought to the scenario that a deer carcass was a crafty ruse, a cunning way to mask the blood spatter and other evidence that may have pointed to Bobby, the killer, instead of his always unlucky uncle. Here are some of the key facts about Teresa's disappearance. She vanished on a Monday afternoon after being on Avery Road. In the wake of her disappearance, Bobby is on record as having been busy carving up and dismembering animals. Teresa's incinerated bones actually turned up inside a burn barrel from Bobby's yard, a steel drum barrel that also included a mixture of animal bones. One would think that an astute detective investigating a young woman's apparent murder would have a natural curiosity about such a coincidence. Quote, how long had you been hanging the deer, Bobby, unquote, Dietering asked. Quote, since Friday night, unquote, Bobby answered, referring to November 4. Quote, who hit the deer, you know? Quote, unquote. Quote, no, unquote. Bobby suggested he found the deer, quote, right up the road, unquote. Quote, okay, again, who claimed the deer, unquote. Quote, I did. I trussed and hung it up that Saturday, unquote. Quote, who skinned it, unquote. Quote, I did, unquote. After asking what Bobby did with the deer skin, Dietering, the bumbling detective from Calumet County, blurted out, quote, shows how much I've been in your garage, doesn't it? Unquote. At that moment, Dietering's interview partner, Wisconsin DCI Special Agent Kevin Hemmerle, made an observation. Quote, it sounds to me like you've skinned and butchered your own deer before, unquote. Quote, yeah, unquote, Bobby agreed. Quote, what would you normally do with the hide then, unquote. Quote, we took them into town, unquote. Quote, oh, okay, unquote. Then Dietering wondered if the local butcher shop accepted deer heads. Quote, no, we just burned them, unquote, Bobby answered. Quote, over in the burning barrel, unquote. At that point, Dietering admitted he wasn't familiar with Bobby's yard, even though it was just a short walking distance from Stephen Avery's trailer. Quote, in the burning barrels, unquote, Dietering wondered. Quote, uh-huh, Bobby agreed, unquote. The conversation shifted back to Avery's skills as a hunter and rugged outdoorsman. Quote, he doesn't hunt that much, Bobby, unquote, Bobby replied. When Hemmerle asked whether the deer's head still existed, Bobby responded by saying that the head was still right side of his mother's garage. Quote, so which burn barrel do you guys normally burn the heads up? Unquote, Dietering asked. Quote, ours. This is the first one that we actually got our family, ... The other one we took into the butcher, unquote. Quote, Describe to me again, Bobby, where you hunt, unquote, Dietering inquired. Quote, how far is that from your house, unquote. His hunting spot was about 2.5 miles from home, he responded. Dietering wondered whether Bobby knew the landowner in northern Manitowoc County. Quote, I don't know, unquote. Quote, but you know, what's his name, Scott Taddock, unquote. Quote, Taddock, Bobby answered, unquote. Bobby was asked if he and Taddock, the soon-to-be husband of Bobby's mother, hunted together. Quote, no, that's the first day, actually, that I hunted, unquote. Now that Bobby's uncle was in custody, Dietering and Hemmerle had a strong desire for Bobby to validate their murder theory. It was important for the reputation of Manitowoc County's tarnished sheriff's office to prove Avery was a cruel, diabolical killer who belonged in prison for the rest of his time on Earth. Ever a shifty detective, Dietering decided the best way... I'm going to move that out of the way so I can rest my book up here. Sorry, pause. Dietering decided the best way to solicit Bobby's help in implicating Avery was to drive a wedge between Bobby and his uncle. Quote, Steve seems to think that he wasn't the last person to see Teresa, but that you had. He says that you were the last person, unquote. Quote, no, unquote, Bobby answered. Quote, that you followed her out of the driveway, unquote. Quote, no, her vehicle was there, unquote. Quote, is that an absolute truth, unquote. Quote, absolute truth, unquote. Bear in mind, Dietering never seriously considered the young man sitting across from him in the interview as the more likely killer. At the time of their interview, Dietering did not have a clue about Bobby's deviant sexual side. He knew nothing about Bobby's sadistic appetite for naked, drowned women and mutilated bodies. As a result, Dietering remained singularly focused that November afternoon. He needed to make Bobby mad, raging mad, at his uncle. I remember that we talked about why Steve would try to jam you up like that. Why, unquote. Quote, that's a good point, unquote, Bobby agreed. Quote, that's the kind of person he is, unquote. Quote, how does that sit with you, unquote. Quote, it makes me angry, unquote. Quote, we're getting to the point where we're going to know everything, okay? You understand that we are going to know everything pretty shortly. Now, my concern is this, Bobby, that if you haven't been 100% honest and truthful with me to this point, it's because of two reasons. One is that you're afraid something bad is going to happen to you and your family if you aren't, if you cooperate with the cops, ... What would be the other reason for you not telling me the truth? Well, I'll tell you, it would be because maybe you had some involvement with it. And like I said, you're shaking your head no. Okay? Unquote. Dietering asked if anybody told Bobby how to answer his interview questions with police. Quote, no, unquote. Quote, nobody? Unquote. Quote, no, unquote. Quote, your mom hasn't had any contact with you about this? You haven't sat down and had a family discussion about how all this should play out when that bald-headed old buzzard starts hanging around and asking questions? Unquote. Quote, nope, unquote. Quote, nothing? Unquote. Quote, nope, unquote. Dietering wanted to believe Bobby had no role in Teresa's brutal killing. Quote, I'm kind of buying into the fact, and like I told you when I talked to you on Saturday, did I tell you that I thought I pretty much believed you then? I still think that pretty much too, okay? Unquote. Still, Dietering wanted to know why Avery, quote, would want to put you in a box. Why would he want to jam you up for? Unquote. Quote, well, he don't want to go back, unquote, Bobby responded. Quote, you just said something you might be on to, unquote, Dietering pondered. Quote, you think maybe he did this because he doesn't want to go back, unquote. Quote, yeah, I know as much as you do, unquote, Bobby replied. Quote, you know more than I do. You guys know a lot more than I do. Unquote. Quote, yeah, but you know what you have that we don't have? You got family intuition, man. Unquote. Quote, yeah, unquote. Quote, so what's your gut telling you? Unquote. Quote, Stephen's playing his hand. Unquote. Quote, who do you think did it? Unquote. Quote, I don't know. Unquote. Quote, you don't know? Unquote. Quote, what I told you guys is all I know about it. Unquote. Quote, so if you were a betting man, I'd bet that you didn't do it. Would you bet like that? Unquote. Quote, yeah, unquote, Bobby wisely agreed. So, that could be why originally Bobby did not have the car at Avery Salvage. That he was just putting it somewhere else to get it away from the family. But then when Dietering is tricking him with this and saying that Stephen's pointing the finger at Bobby, then Bobby's like, oh yeah, watch this. Now I'm going to move the car back on to the property, knowing that the cops are focusing on Stephen. Chapter 3, Alibi. And we're on page 30 of... Hold on, sorry. He's got other excerpts of books at the end of this. 30 of 361. Candy Crush chair. Okay, chapter 3, Alibi. After investing close to 3 years of her life reinvestigating Teresa's death, sinking hundreds of thousands of dollars of her law firm's own money into Stephen Avery's post-conviction defense, world-famous exoneration lawyer Kathleen Zellner now believes the murder time sequence outlined by Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz, sweat, was demonstrably false. According to Zellner, the cellular tower pings off Teresa's cell phone reveal the Auto Trader photographer left Avery's around 2:35 p.m. on Halloween 2005. From there, Teresa retraced her route of travel from Avery Road. Teresa would have turned left on State Highway 147, traveling for a mile. When she got to the intersection of County Road Q, Teresa headed south, turning left. Then she met her disaster shortly afterward, probably along the seldom traveled Cuss Road, a spooky dead-end road covered by a dense swath of woodlands along both sides of the road. The area's general terrain includes a patch of large sand and gravel quarries along County Road Q, including one enormous quarry that has been around for years, a parcel owned by Manitowoc County government. On the day of Avery's arrest, investigators Dietering and Heimerl peppered Bobby with questions about his own movements on the day Teresa met foul play. Speaking of foul play, I saw that there is a long-time crime podcast called Foul Play that isn't the one that they cover the Stephen case and steal stuff from people. So pretty interesting to me that there has been a existed for like 6 years, that talks about wrongful convictions and true crime podcast, and they stole the name Foul Play from that. Just thought it was interesting. Anyway, quote, now I want to know again about when you left that day, unquote, Dietering inquired. Quote, you remember what time that was, unquote. Quote, right around 3 o'clock, unquote. Quote, did you see anyone when you were leaving the driveway, unquote. Quote, when I left, unquote. Quote, yes, unquote. Quote, no, I didn't see one. No, I didn't see no one coming up the driveway, unquote. Quote, were there any cars in the driveway? Unquote. Quote, yeah, it's a little SUV, unquote. Quote, now you told me that you were nowhere near that teal-covered SUV, unquote. Quote, nope, unquote. Quote, never, unquote. Quote, nope, unquote. Quote, never there, unquote. Quote, never there, unquote. Quote, never touched it, unquote. Quote, nope, unquote. Quote, did you go anywhere that night after you got home from your hunting, unquote. Quote, no, unquote. Quote, you stayed home, unquote. Quote, went to work, unquote. Bobby worked at Fisher Hamilton in Manitowoc, a metal processing plant in town. He told the police he left for work at 9:30 p.m., which is 7 hours after Bobby was discreetly eyeing Teresa from inside his trailer window. Quote, so what did you do when you were at home? Unquote. Quote, napped, ... I came right home after hunting, unquote. Suddenly, the interview took a change of direction. Detering wanted to boast about his credentials. Quote, I've been in law enforcement for almost 30 years, and I've done more than an interview or two, okay? ... And what works for me is that I'll be honest, and then I find that usually people are honest in return, okay? I'm going to tell you something, okay? I can tell you that nobody from any sheriff's department planted any evidence anywhere. And that vehicle was found because we thought this through. And we figured that something like this could happen, ... We made sure that no Manitowoc City or County cop was on the property without another agency right alongside them, so that anything that might be falling could be falling honestly, unquote. 'Cause, yeah, cops don't cover for other cops ever. You know, they're only going to cover for cops in their own place. They're not going to cover for other cops. There's no thin blue line or anything like that. No, that would be crazy talk. Detering wanted Bobby to understand his role investigating the homicide. Quote, find the somebody that did something. I know you didn't. I'm pretty confident that you have no play in this. Am I right about that? Unquote. Bobby mumbled something that couldn't be heard. At that juncture, Kevin Heimerl, I don't know how you pronounce that, bragged how he worked at the Wisconsin DCI, the same agency assigned in 2003, 2 years earlier, to review the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office 1985 rape investigation. There was no rape, spearheaded by Sheriff Kostorik, the one that put Stephen Avery unjustly in prison for 18 years for a violent rape, there was no rape, committed by Gregory Allen. It drives me nuts that people perpetuate that misinformation. There was no rape. It was an attempted rape. Penny Bernstein fought it off, and there was no rape. Quote, the Department of Justice, DCI, that's who I work for. We are here. We are in the middle of this thing. The same agency that would ask to review that first case. Those same cops, me and the guys I work with, the guys that are here, okay? Another thing I want to chew on, ... People suggested that maybe me and the people I'm working with or any other cop like to make stuff up, twist stuff. I got it better. They rely on me. I got 2 kids that rely on me. You know what? There is no case more important to me, and I'm not going to jeopardize my family and my life for anybody in any investigation, okay? Unquote. Quote, that's where I am as well, unquote, Detering added. Quote, who is going put their career, that's how it's written. Who is going put their career because you know you could be in the insurance sales and do a rotten job at it and get fired, unquote, Heimerl reasoned. Quote, you can get another job in insurance sales somewhere else, but, you know, when a cop gets busted for lying, doing something illegal, they lose their job. Yeah, okay. They don't get another job. They don't get another cop job, okay? Unquote. Quote, okay, unquote, Bobby repeated. Quote, because if we're not credible, We can't go into court, unquote, Hemmerle maintained. Quote, that's why you can't be a cop if you're not believed, unquote. What a bunch of bull smurf. Quote, yeah, you know, basically a cop whose word is worth nothing isn't worth anything as a cop. You know, because why go up on a stand? I swear to tell the truth, and for the same reasons Kevin just insisted, I've got a family. I love my family. I need to have a few things to myself. You wouldn't lie or do anything illegal, but your family comes first, doesn't it? Unquote. Quote, yeah, unquote, Bobby agreed. Transcripts of Bobby's police interviews show that almost all of his police interview answers were just one-word answers. Yet a bond was forming between Bobby and the police. They wanted to use him to prosecute Avery. He could strengthen their case. For Bobby, the opportunity to help the police nail his uncle would solidify his purported alibi. Quote, everybody else kind of takes a back seat, unquote, Detering reminded Bobby. Quote, you're not different than me. You're not different than Kevin. You're not different than any other cop. That's something that we all have in common. We all love our families, and we want to do the right thing for our families, unquote. The temptation of planting evidence continued to come up, but Bobby was not bringing up the topic. It was Detering and Hemmerle who kept dredging up the topic. Quote, it brings shame, humiliation, poverty. We wouldn't want anything like that, unquote, Detering offered. Quote, I'm not taking a chance, ... I'm 50-some years old. How old are you? Unquote. Quote, 19, unquote. Quote, you can walk down the street, and if there's a job to be young, healthy, you could work here. You know what? I'm starting to be a liability. Health insurance reasons, ... I can't do wrong things because there's too much writing on it for me. You believe that? Unquote. Quote, yeah, unquote. Quote, I'm sure that the family would love to and probably does believe that there is some sort of conspiracy, but I'm here to tell you something, ... You know what? Imagine how many people, how many police officers it would take to orchestrate a conspiracy of this size, unquote. Quote, yeah, unquote. Quote, one person could not do it, all right? Unquote. Quote, yeah, unquote. Quote, do you think two people could orchestrate a conspiracy of this size? Unquote. Quote, no, unquote. Quote, okay, now you're talking more than two dirty cops within one police agency. All the supervisors' eyes and everybody else, the neighboring sheriff's department and state special agents and everybody else, and crime lab personnel. You know, you can't fool forensics, unquote. Quote, yeah, unquote. Detering brought up the old motorcycle gang saying of how 3 people can keep a secret if 2 are dead. Quote, okay, that means if you don't want somebody else to know anything, you can't involve anybody else because somebody's going to give something up, unquote. Bobby was told he, quote, can believe what you want with your family about the conspiracy, ... I can't tell you what to think, okay? But I can tell you that we do have a lot of stuff. I don't understand why Steve would tell somebody something like he wasn't the last one to see her. You know, I don't understand that. What do you think about that? Unquote. Bobby, quote, I don't understand how, unquote. Quote, okay, do you get along with Steve pretty well? Unquote. Quote, sometimes, unquote. Quote, what was the last thing that caused you to not get along with him? Unquote. Once again, Bobby mumbled something unclear. Eventually, Detering asked Bobby whether he dated. Quote, do you see anybody? Unquote. Quote, no, unquote. Quote, you're going to break a lot of young ladies' hearts. Unquote. Quote, I don't have a girlfriend, unquote. Quote, ha, you probably will die as a rich man if you keep that attitude, okay? Unquote. Given that a couple of charred human bones apparently did turn up near his uncle's burned pile pit, the next question made sense to ask. but Dietering had no idea whether his witness was being truthful or deceitful because authorities did not obtain any foot impressions near Avery's burn pit. In effect, it was a wasted question. Quote, "Is there any way or any reason you can think of why your footprints might be near Steve's fire pit, or was it Steve's burn barrel?" Unquote. Quote, "No," unquote. Quote, "No way that they'd be there?" Unquote. Quote, "I've been all over the place, not by the burn barrels and fire pit," unquote. Quote, "I just wanted to make sure, okay? Because if something like that'd show up, I worry you'd disappoint me," unquote. Heimerl interjected, quote, "Well, if something like that would show up, it would potentially disappoint Bobby," unquote. Quote, "Yeah," unquote, Dietering agreed. Hi, Stephanie. Bobby sat there in utter silence. He knew if he could just sweat out a few more minutes, his interview with these two cops would all be over. Colin, he was on and off with Kendra, who later became his wife. Bobby sat there in utter silence. Oh, I read that already. Quote, we got a room available to get your swab, fingerprints, and all that. So I think it's time to do that now. It's 3:51 p.m. on my watch. You nervous?" Unquote, Dietering inquired. Bobby did not answer. Quote, "That was an eye roll," unquote, Heimerl remarked. "Yes or no?" Unquote. Quote, "No," unquote, Bobby responded. I'm trying to drink at new chapters. Chapter 4, Zellner Factor. Just 4 days before the 12-year anniversary of Teresa's mysterious Manitowoc County murder, the condemned prisoner made a prepaid collect call from his permanent residence behind the walls of the Waupun Correctional Center, where we will be on July 30th. The simple man had gained the unwavering support of millions of men and women across the globe, people whose lives were forever touched by the Emmy-winning documentary. But their lives have never intersected with the plight of Steven Avery, a man unjustly imprisoned and snatched from society for 18 long years. Starting in his early 20s, this same man at age 43 was on the verge of collecting a multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit at the hands of law enforcement in Avery's native Manitowoc County. Suddenly, just days before, he got to sit inside the law offices for the sworn deposition of the man responsible for his disastrous life, retired Manitowoc County Sheriff Tom Kocourek. Avery found himself ripped away from his mother and father, Dolores and Al, his brothers Chuck and Earl, and his sister Barb. We don't care about those. This time, unlike the last time, there was a major news media marketing campaign long before any trial to brand Avery a demon, a sicko, a pariah, the pond scum of the earth. The people involved in this effort included the likes of Manitowoc Sheriff Kenny Peterson, Under Sheriff Rob Herman, Manitowoc County Special Prosecutor Sweaty Sweat Sweat, Calumet Sheriff Jerry Pago, Calumet County Sheriff's investigator Mark Wiegert, and Special Agent Tom Fossbender worked at the Wisconsin DCI. All 6 like-minded men between their 40s and 60s were in complete agreement. Steven Avery was going to go down hard for Teresa's murder, and everyone in Wisconsin would be assured that he was a bloodthirsty monster. The Steven Avery is guilty pre-trial publicity mantra was bigger than a tidal wave. It was a typhoon, a monsoon. At the end of the day, after a few days of back and forth jury deliberations, including questions surrounding the testimony of Kratz's leadoff witness, Bobby Dassey, Avery was tried and convicted of the first-degree murder, though many people still had lingering doubts, even after trial had ended. Indeed, Avery was one of the last persons to see Teresa, but most people now believe what Avery has always professed from the get-go, that he is innocent, that he had nothing to do with her killing. What motive did he have to harm the freelance photographer from Green Bay? Rational people, objective people, people who are deep critical thinkers, struggle to find the motive. Of course, there is another nagging question weighing on the minds of many. If Avery did not murder Teresa, then who did and why? Bobby. Since January 2016, Avery has had a tireless advocate who dropped into his life from Wisconsin's dreaded rival, Illinois. Lucky for him, the suburban Chicago woman out of Downers Grove, which is the town next to mine, happens to be regarded as one of the country's foremost lawyers in exposing police corruption and prosecutorial misconduct. She has achieved a miraculous streak of overturning more than 20 wrongful convictions since the 1990s. Quote, in 23 years, Kathleen Zellner has righted more wrongful prosecutions than any private attorney in America. No private attorney in the United States has successfully won for the release of more innocent defendants, unquote, her website proclaims. As of September 27, 2018, the United States had 2,270 exonerations. They've got a picture of her plaques at her office, newspaper articles. Quote, my interest in this area of law resulted in being appointed on a death penalty case, representing a serial killer. I represented an individual named Larry Eiler in the early 1990s, and so I had to prepare a post-conviction. I had started my own law firm. I was the in-house counsel for a large HMO, and I was doing medical malpractice, but my clerks thought it would be interesting to see if we could tackle the complexity of a post-conviction case in 1992 with someone that everyone believed was guilty. Zellner said she made incredible discoveries that Eiler had only been convicted of one murder. Quote, I realized as we were progressing that we were really good at what we were doing, and yet I'm getting ready to overturn the one conviction for someone that I know has committed 21 murders. So the dilemma I was in was to try to figure out how to turn it into something positive, something good. What I figured out was my client was probably infected with the HIV virus, and I decided to have medical testing done. And I confirmed that he had a full-blown case of AIDS. So I went to him, ... Whenever I say ... it's when the ... appears in the book. And that means the whole quote is not there. They're cherry picking things. So something's missing, but it's allegedly not important. I persuaded him to give to me the 21 confessions to all the murders he had committed in tremendous detail. And I ended up helping to close all of those cases with 3 jurisdictions and the FBI. And we closed all of the murder cases. I decided at that point that I would never represent someone again that I believed was guilty. I did not see myself as a criminal defense attorney, but I thought that our skill level on the Eiler case indicated that we, as small a firm as we are, could investigate and uncover evidence that the police had not and the prosecutors had not, unquote. In 1994, Zellner took on her next case, the Joseph Burrows murder case. The murder victim in that crime southeast of Kankakee, Illinois, was a frail 88-year-old retired farmer named William Dulin. The Iroquois County killing occurred on November 8, 1988. Dulin's bloody body was found inside his home. 4 years later, in 1992, Joseph Burrows' murder conviction was affirmed by the Illinois Supreme Court, and he was scheduled to die by the way of lethal injection prior to Zellner's arrival on the case. Quote, I was called by the same group that had national funding and had given me the Eiler case, so I really didn't want to take the call, unquote, Zellner said. Quote, but they said to me, he's innocent. We're very sure he's innocent. And it's going to take a tremendous effort because he's facing the death penalty, and he had an execution date set within 120 days of when we took the case, unquote. Zellner goes on to explain how, quote, we took Mr. Burroughs' case and we began an intensive effort to save his life and vacate his conviction. And because I had been with someone who was so profoundly guilty and evil, I became an expert in recognizing innocence. And I knew that Mr. Burroughs was innocent and that this was not a DNA case. This turned on the testimony of his co-defendant who had committed the murder, unquote. As she dug into the case, Zellner realized the slaying was all about the ballistics from where the 88-year-old farmer was slain. Quote, after consulting with ballistic experts, I figured out that a woman had committed the murder of an 88-year-old farmer in downstate Illinois, and there had been a struggle where shots had been fired into the ceiling. And I knew that the gentleman that was killed was so frail there wouldn't have been a struggle with my client, who was 6'2" and weighed about 240 pounds, unquote. The co-defendant, Gail Potter, age 32, got a 12-year prison sentence under a plea agreement with prosecutors where she fingered the 35-year-old Burroughs as the killer and another guy as an accomplice in the small-town robbery murder. Burroughs and Ralph Fry, who were also wrongfully convicted of the killing, were actually about 60 miles away in their Champaign-Urbana area at the time of Doolin's death in tiny Iroquois County. Quote, and she was going to be out in about 12 months, unquote, Zellner said. Quote, so I decided to focus all of my efforts on getting her, since I had become so skilled at getting confessions, getting her to confess to me that she had committed this murder, unquote. Zellner said she knew that because of double jeopardy laws, Potter could not be prosecuted for murder at that stage. Quote, so I visited her 50 times, and we got to know each other, and we talked about Mr. Burroughs' children and the fact that he was months away from being executed, and they were executing people in Illinois at that time, and she gradually came around to the position that she would testify at an evidentiary hearing which was in Kankakee, Illinois, unquote. At that point, there had been hardly any death penalty cases in America that had ever been overturned by someone claiming to be innocent as Burroughs. Quote, so I put her on the stand. Not a lot of confidence in what she would do because she was very sociopathic. So the first question I asked her was, who shot William Dillon? And she paused and she said, I shot William Dillon. And it was that example of the narcissistic sociopath, but the words came out of her mouth and it saved Mr. Burroughs' life, unquote. In the end, Potter was charged with perjury, and she served 3 more years of Illinois prison time. She never did get the death penalty. Quote, but I walked out the front door with him, and they took his handcuffs off, chains, and we walked out the door. It was on the front page of the New York Times, and I thought to myself, this is what I want to do with the rest of my professional career. I've gotten big verdicts. I've won millions of dollars in verdicts. I know that I can convince a jury, but nothing in my mind topped the experience of thinking that you'd save someone's life or you at least made a major contribution to saving a life, unquote. Avery's crusaders believe it's only a matter of time before he will walk outside the Waupun Correctional Center in south central Wisconsin as a smiling, teary-eyed free man, vindicated for a sloppy and corrupt murder investigation. But it took Avery 18 years, the first time around, to convince the rest of the world of his innocence in the brutal attack that victimized Manitowoc businesswoman Penny Bernstein in the late summer months of 1985. Naturally, a second Avery exoneration would cause heads to spin in the Wisconsin criminal justice arena. Powerful politicians from both political parties, Democrats and Republicans, would be tarnished and shamed. For the time being, Wisconsin's judicial system, which does not have a reputation for honesty and integrity, is the last line of defense for the Avery is guilty faction. Wisconsin's politically connected people are uncomfortable with the latest worldwide Making a Murderer sequel. The first documentary was downright embarrassing enough. It exposed how Wisconsin's criminal justice system, how its small-town police forces still operate. Most of the dairy state consists of judges who are elected on popularity votes, not appointed after a rigorous interview and screening process as a number of states have established. Although Wisconsin once had a proud reputation for being reform-oriented and one of the most progressive states in the country, it is not that way any longer. There are no meaningful reforms in Wisconsin to improve the state's blemished reputation when it comes to small-town police work, criminal forensics, and avoiding conflicts of interest in law enforcement. Oh, my back is killing me now. There are taboo topics that are not publicly talked about. And yet, Wisconsin has an overabundance of unsolved murders and cold cases because these crimes tend to occur inside the jurisdiction of largely untrained and inexperienced police agencies and sheriff's offices, people who are generally ill-equipped, inept, and simply not up to the task of solving complicated murder cases. If it is one thing for police cars to show up at the scene of the bloody murder and the killer is sitting on the front porch stoop with a cigarette dangling from his mouth, his hands in the air, and the bloody knife resting at the foot of his bloody sneakers, but what about the many unspeakable crimes of violence when the motive is not immediately apparent, when the killer is lurking in the shadows of society? If those are the cards you are dealt, and you are a condemned but innocent prisoner, then you need a lawyer who can do more than just poke holes in the original testimony and evidence offered at your first murder trial. You need a lawyer who is not just regarded as an all-star in his or her neck of the woods, but a seasoned and skilled lawyer who has the reputation of being world-class, the most valuable player in his or her legal specialization. And you need that MVP lawyer who can get you access to an entire roster of internationally renowned experts, the cream of the crop, in complicated topics like biological and genetic science, criminal behavior, computer forensics, and prosecutorial misconduct. If you are Steven Avery, you need the best of the best working on your side. You need someone such as attorney Kathleen Zellner from Illinois. Quote, Steven Avery started writing to me in 2011. I was in the middle of a civil rights case in Washington, and so I really didn't have time to work on it, and then his current girlfriend did contact me in September 2015. I did watch the documentary on Netflix, and the reason I took the case is because I felt that he had been discriminated against because his family was poor and they were uneducated. I know he's innocent. Now I just have to prove it, unquote. But starting from scratch, trying to unwind a decade-old solved murder is no easy task. The Avery case is like climbing Mount Everest. It's wicked and nasty, and there are numerous unexpected avalanches tumbling down the mountain, trying to flatten Zellner and her crusaders in their quest for fairness and justice. Quote, I do not like people that are bullies, unquote, Zellner said. Quote, I felt from a very young age that I was strong enough to protect people that were weaker or were victims. Half of my exoneration cases have led to the apprehension of the real killer. I've probably solved way more murder cases than most homicide detectives. I think the good thing about the Netflix documentary was that it educated the public. Investigations can be corrupt. The evidence can be planted. Police officers can feel sufficiently pressured, unquote. It goes without saying Zellner has a few friends who are rooting for her to overturn Avery's murder conviction among Wisconsin's police law enforcement agencies. This is hardly a surprise. In Wisconsin, it's quite common for police departments to keep their mouths shut and circle the wagons when someone in their profession gets outed for being a dirty, crooked cop. Zellner is now in her third full year of providing free, pro bono legal representation to the world-famous Manitowoc County condemned inmate. Without Zellner's efforts, Avery is doomed. He has no chance for parole and will surely die inside of his lonely little prison cell, and many of the deep, dark, and disturbing secrets regarding the true facts of the crime would remain bottled up forever. But now, so it seems, Zellner is in her best position to expose the shenanigans, the evidence planting, the dirty tricks played by the likes of Special Prosecutor Sweaty Sweat. She is in prime position to pull down the curtains and show to the rest of the world the many instances where the evidence pieces magically appeared at the most opportune times of the murder investigation against Avery and later his 16-year-old developmentally disabled nephew, Brendan. Given the international fervor generated by the Avery murder case, and given the backlash against the brave Emmy Award-winning documentarians Moira Demos and Laura Riccardi, who have brought Wisconsin's boils to the rest of the world's attention, there is only one logical way for Avery to regain the freedom he lost on November 9, 2005. Attorney Kathleen Zellner must be overwhelmingly successful in convincing America's judicial system that the person who killed Teresa, incinerated her body, and then cut her up into tiny pieces was someone other than her client. She must, in convincing fashion, put forth a compelling argument before the appeals court judges that the real evidence, the overlooked, sheds light on the one or perhaps two culprits still roaming around and lurking in the shadows of society. Bad people, terribly deranged, but people who still come and go freely in their Wisconsin communities to this very day. Just as Manitowoc County's dangerous sexual predator, Gregory Allen, was allowed to do for another decade until he was finally captured and put in prison for life because he could not stop attacking and raping women during the 1980s and 1990s. What if Zellner, at this stage of the post-conviction process, is on the right path? What if she has uncovered the long-suspected hidden truth, disturbing evidence that points to somebody other than Avery, but perhaps somebody who is still connected back to the family, somebody who is already familiar with the immediate landscaping, including Avery Road and Bear the dog? Regardless of your opinion about Avery's guilt or innocence, you cannot deny that there were two strange people whose courtroom testimony helped sack Avery at his jury trial. One was Bobby, the killer, the nephew. The other was Scott Taddock, the abusive woman beater who is the current husband of Avery's dysfunctional sister, Barb, who has become an outcast within her family. Taddock has a reputation of being a thug and a compulsive liar. Nothing out of his mouth can be trusted. He is regarded as one of the meanest monsters who lived in the Mishicot Two Rivers area, and he's behaved that way for years, court documents and police reports outline. In November 2017, Zellner presented Wisconsin's Circuit Court with reams of evidence pointing at Bobby Dassey and Scott Taddock as being the most likely people involved in Teresa's death and dismemberment of her body. Quote, "This new evidence establishes a reasonable probability that a different result would be reached at a new trial based upon the totality of the new evidence. In summary, this evidence consists of brand new admissions from Barb Taddock and Mr. Taddock that they were aware that Ms. Halbach left the Avery property prior to her murder, and an affidavit from Barb's stepson, Brad Dassey, that Barb tried to remove relevant and probative evidence from the Dassey computer before it was seized by police on April 21, 2006, unquote." Now we're going on to chapter 5. It is 2:45, so this is going to be the last chapter for today. We're on page 48 out of 361. Chapter 5 is titled Skinny. On the day after Avery's arrest in Manitowoc for Teresa's killing, a strange, cryptic letter made it 30 miles north. The, quote, Green Bay Post Office pulled a piece of mail off their conveyor and reported it to Green Bay authorities, unquote. That piece of mail consisted of a letter without any envelope. It, quote, was folded in thirds, ... There was no stamp attached. The note, upon inspection, revealed that the writer indicated a body was burned up in the aluminum smelter at 3 a.m. on Friday morning. The note was signed Sickakee. The note was written in blue ink and had both printing and cursive writing in the body of the note, unquote. That was from Dietering's report. Indeed, the note was bizarre and baffling. One thing was certain. It was not Avery's handwriting. Was it from a crack? It says a crack spot. Was it from a crack spot? Or perhaps somebody with inside knowledge of Teresa's murder? The police were never able to decipher the letter's origin. Actually, they chose to downplay its relevance. After all, if the letter pointed at somebody else instead of Avery, that would have posed a public relations nightmare of epic proportions for Manitowoc and Calumet counties, as well as the Wisconsin Department of Justice. These agencies wanted Avery locked up and gone. They were tired of him being the public crusader for criminal justice reform in Wisconsin. None of the bad and incompetent cops of Wisconsin wanted anything to change. They wanted to maintain status quo, and Avery's constant appearance in the press only reminded the public at large about the weaknesses and flaws in Wisconsin's fractured judicial system. As it turned out, John Dietering, the Calumet investigator who interviewed Bobby, drew the assignment to follow up on the mysterious letter. He learned, quote, the mail that was being sorted in Green Bay comes from Manitowoc, Two Rivers, Green Bay, and Des Peres. I don't know what that one is. The Green Bay police officer, Fred Leighton, advised that gloves were used to handle the piece of mail and the Sickakee letter would be held at Green Bay's police department, unquote. Despite the intense statewide media feeding frenzy surrounding Avery's arrest, there had been no stories published regarding the prospect of Teresa's bones being burned. Then, 2 days after the mysterious letter, the Herald Times reporter in Manitowoc ran a front-page newspaper article explaining, quote, burned human remains, key to Halbach's SUV, found on Avery's land, unquote. The mysterious letter writer had prophetically revealed, quote, body was burned up in aluminum, spelled A-L-U-N-A-M-O-N, so spelled incorrectly, smelter. 3 a.m. Friday, spelled wrong. Friday was spelled F-R-I-D-Y. Morn. Sickakee. Sickakee is in all capitals. The odd letter was not signed with the writer's real name. Rather, it ended with the following key identifiers. Quote, Manitowoc Sheriff. Sheriff spelled incorrectly. It's missing the I. Manitowoc Sheriff Avery. Unquote. Finally, a dozen years later, private investigator James Kirby traveled to Manitowoc to interview Lisa Novacek, payroll employee at Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry. She also worked at the foundry in 2005 and has familiarity with her company's employees. The business has been a mainstay in Manitowoc since the early 1900s. It's tucked inside an old industrial neighborhood and remains a vibrant blue-collar operation to this day. Quote, I showed Ms. Novacek the Sickakee note, which was reportedly found during sorting at the Green Bay post office. Novacek told me there were 20 people who worked the night shift at the aluminum foundry in early November 2005, and that about a half of them were illiterate or partially literate, and that the Sickakee note could have been written by one of them. Ms. Novacek told me that Scott Taddock's nickname at work in 2005 was Skinny, and that Sickakee may be a reference to Scott Taddock. And then there's a picture of Scott's work. When Scott Taddock was 29, he was hauled into the Manitowoc County Jail on charges of battery, disorderly conduct, and criminal damage to property. And it would not be the only time he would end up in one of the local jails for criminal acts of violent tendencies. According to the criminal complaint, officers in nearby Two Rivers met with a woman on July 7, 1997, at her residence. Quote, she had an altercation with her live-in boyfriend, Scott Taddock. She stated Scott had accused her of seeing another male, and she told him to leave the residence. Scott began picking up some clothing and personal items. At one point, she walked past Scott, and he was swinging at the back of her head with his left hand, but he missed her. She told Scott that was the last straw, and she went into the TV room to get his duffel bag and take it to the kitchen, unquote. At that point, Scott, quote, Scott went out of control and picked up the water cooler and slammed it down, hitting the kitchen chair and the microwave cart. She then called her mom and dad to come over because she feared for her life and her son. Scott kept making comments to her, and he pushed her 2 times, unquote. Taddock decided to take out his anger and rage upon the woman's laundry. Quote, Scott went downstairs and threw all her laundry, clean and dirty, all over the basement floor and in the drain. Scott also punched her in the chest with his right fist. Scott walked back up the stairs, and the victim was going to follow when Scott locked the basement door. When she opened the door, Scott punched her again. Scott's mother and father had arrived, and both she and his mother had seen Scott strike her. Scott tried to push her down the basement stairs and shut the door, unquote. When Taddock went into the garage, a fight erupted over the fishing rods. Quote, she was going to take the rods away from Scott, and he slapped her on the right arm. Scott filled up his car with his items and told his mom to get his brother, unquote. As tensions escalated, Taddock drilled his girlfriend's son, who was only a boy. Quote, Scott punched him in the upper left chest with his right fist. The boy fell to the floor and was crying. Her son is 11 years old, unquote. More chaos ensued. Quote, Scott went outside and ripped the CB out of her truck. She went into her truck to check for damage, and Scott was screaming at her, and he pulled her hair. After Scott pulled out the radio, her radio, clock, blinkers, and backup lights would not work. At no time did she give anyone permission to damage her property, unquote. The victim's 11-year-old son gave this account to Two Rivers police. Quote, he saw Scott pushing his mom. Scott went downstairs to get some clothes, and Scott began to throw clothes all over, and Scott tried to rip up her sweatshirts. He stated he was fearful Scott would hurt his mom. Scott began screaming at him and calling him a lard ass and a fat ass, unquote. Things got nasty when the child tried to stop Taddock from harming his mother. Quote, Scott went back upstairs and was pushing his mom around in the kitchen. He stepped between the two, and Scott knocked him to the ground. He fell to the floor, and he was crying because it hurt, unquote. Under a plea bargain, Scott Taddock was found guilty of criminal battery. On October 13, 1998, he was ordered to stay in the local jail for 135 days. 7 years later, at the time of Teresa's disappearance, Taddock worked the overnight shift at the aluminum foundry near Manitowoc's downtown. All of a sudden, the Sikkakee letter arrived in Green Bay, suggesting Teresa's body was incinerated. Was the Wisconsin aluminum foundry plant in Manitowoc central to the missing photographer's dismemberment? Was Sikkakee an illiterate worker's best attempt at trying to identify Taddock by his nickname of Skinny at the foundry? As of 2006, plant foreman Keith Schaefer had known Taddock for 9 years. Quote, Keith went on to say he had been hearing Scott Taddock telling some of the workers in the plant about information on the Teresa Halbach murder-homicide investigation. Keith had heard that Scott had not shown up for work on October 31, 2005. However, he had heard he went to see his mother in the hospital. Scott had been telling people he had seen the fire on Halloween by Stephen Avery, and Scott or the other people, made it sound like he had gotten out of the vehicle and actually talked to Stephen by the fire. Keith also heard from other guys that Scott had noticed stains on the pants and shirts of one of Barbara's kids, unquote. As many people may remember, the prosecution maintained the infamous bleached blue jeans belonged to Avery's mentally disabled nephew, Brendan. Attorney Zellner strongly suspects that any cryptic conversations were not in regard to Avery's slow nephew. Rather, any phone calls made to Tadek at the Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry concerned Barb's other son, Bobby, the killer. After all, Brendan, 16, and Scott Tadek had nothing in common and had no real relationship whatsoever. On the other hand, Bobby and Tadek were tight. After Teresa went missing, quote, Keith described Scott as being very edgy lately, a short-tempered, angry person. Keith said he is a chronic liar and does not really get along with a lot of people at the plant. It would never know when he would blow up at somebody. Keith felt Scott also knew more about the murder than he had told people, and Keith felt Scott could be very capable of the murder or knowing something more, unquote. Yet all the while, Tadek's romantic relationship with Barb remained fine. Quote, however, because of the case, he did seem disturbed by what was going on, Schaefer said. After Stephen was arrested, Scott had thought it had been a setup and that he was being framed. However, a week later, Scott did not believe this anymore and thought Stephen was guilty. Unquote. And that's the end of the chapter and the end of today's story time. Put a picture of Stephen to mark this place. So we still got a whole lot to go. But we will be reading again on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, at 1 p.m. Central Time. We'll start where we left off today. And that will be it for this week, Monday and Wednesday. And then maybe we'll do Monday and Wednesday next week as well. And we'll just keep going until the book is finished. Curiouser and curiouser, huh? Scott really is so lovely. Punching an 11-year-old and a woman. Good job there. No other lives are scheduled. Christopher wants me to do another live about the rally. I could possibly do something tomorrow. I've got an appointment at 1:00 tomorrow. So, and I'm not sure how long that's going to take. So, I guess you're just going to have to stay tuned if I end up popping on for a little bit tomorrow just to talk about rally stuff. But Wednesday we're reading the book, and Thursday I'm going to the prison to go visit Melissa Kaluzinski for the first time in a year and a half. So it's not going to be the best visit because she's behind glass. So we can't hug. I can't buy her any food. And they make it so it can only be a 2-hour visit. So and it had to be scheduled. So my visit is from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. and it's a 2.5-hour drive to the prison. So so maybe I'll go live on Thursday after I get back over on Justice with Jax and talk about my visit with Melissa. Colin is asking, could you find the link on Stephen Avery Project and repost the convo with John Farrick? Yeah, we can try and find it. Christopher's the one that finds all that stuff. So I don't know if Christopher is watching right now, if he'll find it. Otherwise, maybe I'll try. But I'm not the best at that stuff. But all right, I'm gonna go. I've got a million notifications I've gotten while I've been on here. So I'm going to check through that, what's going on. And then I also have an event I'm supposed to be hosting in 4 hours. And so I got to do some stuff on that. So I'm out for today. Thank you for joining part 1 of story time of the Wrecking Crew. And we will continue on Wednesday. But investigation always continues.